Moneyball. We're back, baby. A couple of months ago, we did our first ever Moneyball style rebuild, and that was actually my first ever MLB The Show rebuild that I've done on this channel. And I think it was a very good and interesting method that we attempted to do, following the old movie style of on-base percentage, as well as ERA, in order to try to calculate what was the best Moneyball season possible in MLB The Show. I also want to note, it's snowing outside, so my hair is a mess. The lighting is probably a mess because it is, I just walked outside and my hair is all wet and all of that, so what we're going to do in this is going to be a little bit different than any of my other rebuilds, because we are going to actually be doing ourselves a little challenge video. In this challenge video, we are actually going to be using the 2024 statistics that we got this past season in order to help tell us which players are more valuable per dollar than they were in previous installments. Therefore, we are using actually the most up-to-date information and can realistically build a Moneyball team using any of the algorithms that we know and exist inside of the Moneyball formula to the most up-to-date form. We actually can see what these players are, and we can apply it to really the only simulation that we can, which is MLB The Show, which is a little bit flawed. Realistically, I understand that. However, we're going to try and see if we can rebuild a team using all these 24 stats. Now, a caveat that we're going to do that's a little bit different than our previous one is we're actually going to try a couple different formulas. While we are going to be applying the old A's Moneyball technique of focusing on base percentage, as well as what we're going to actually call whip instead of ERA for this measurement, we are also going to be attempting to use an OPS plus and ERA plus metric in order to use last year's stats relative to the rest of the field to build a team that is, once again, more valuable on a per dollar basis for each player. The other method that we're going to use is actually going to be a WAR-based method, where we are going to create and take players that have a higher value of WAR in regards to then their dollar amount again. Within this test case, we are going to be using 3 different teams in order to create this measurement. The first team is the most obvious. It is the Oakland A's, who were the 2002 team that we based the Moneyball experiment off of, in which we are going to be using that on-base measurement. The second team is going to be the Boston Red Sox, another team that helped kind of innovate the analytics era in the mid-2000s to 2010s, which helped lead them to 4 World Series in that time span. Now, while they didn't necessarily use the OPS plus or ERA plus metrics, those are going to be the metrics we are going to use for them for this experiment. And lastly, the one that we are going to be using is a more modern take, where we're going to try to value other different levels of players, where we are going to be using WAR and WAA with the Los Angeles Dodgers in order to try to build another team that is a closer and more modern take on analytics, which actually values defense rather than previous takes of it. One problem with being like 6'4" is that I'm too tall. No matter what I do, I'd like get outside of the frame, so I can't like fully sit in front of this whiteboard. I don't know if I should be doing whiteboard videos like this if I can't fit into the frame with them. Now, part of the intrigue to this take is that each of these teams have different values, and therefore they have different players. So what we ended up doing in order to create these measurements is I went over on StatHead and got all of our best ratings throughout the entire season for each of these stats. We took each of these rankings and started looking for outliers across salaries, essentially. Now, with salaries, we had to take a little bit of a different approach. StatHead does not have a dollar amount for each value, and SpotTrax is a little bit spotty as well, especially now knowing that the next season is starting. We're starting to get to the point where new contracts are being applied, so I had to use MLB The Show's contracts in order to help make this more realistic. Now, one of the ways that we ended up getting these outliers is we went down this list and started looking at players by sorting out by salary. First, we started with a $3 million mark and started there, and only allowed us to pick players under that $3 million. Over time, that number had to go higher in order to be able to actually value players at positions that had more price. Say, first base was actually a pretty expensive position. But in each of these cases, we ended up finding a full roster of 26 players that at each position had a value that kept them in the Moneyball market under $65 million.
And for Brent Rooker, he hits one long again. Brent Rooker, see you later.
Oh my God!
Anything I can do
No player better epitomizes undervalued star like Brent Rooker. The Oakland A's designated hitter this season hit .293 with an on-base percentage of .365 and an OPS plus of .165, raking in 39 home runs on a way to a Silver Slugger this season and a 10th MVP voting. All of that while being paid only $1.4 million, most of that being incentives by the Oakland A's. Rooker epitomizes this because originally drafted in Minnesota, he was not given many chances after suffering an injury in the 2021 season. This led to him being traded to the San Diego Padres, who then also traded him to the Royals before being DFA'd. This means he was basically one of the cheapest players in the league who raked in 30 home runs in 2023 in a breakout season, which led to a 39 home run season in 2024. Now, in the future, he will not be worth only $3.5 million, which is his expected salary for this upcoming season, but right now, you can still get him for very cheap.
Xavier Edwards now. Line, base hit, left center field. In comes Conine. Xavier Edwards with the game winner. It's a Marlins win.
Xavier Edwards is a different type of prospect compared to Brent Rooker. Being 25 years old, this is about his second season in the majors, and Xavier Edwards might not be the prototypical Moneyball style player when you consider how he got here. Being a first-round pick in the 2018 draft by the San Diego Padres, he was eventually traded as part of the Hunter Renfroe trade that sent him to the Tampa Bay Rays. After several really good seasons in the minors, he became the number 4 prospect for the Tampa Bay Rays, which led him to be a key potential trade piece. In 2022, he had a down year in the minors, hitting .246, and being not much of a power hitter, was not really able to get on base as much as he normally is. This led him to being a little bit undervalued. This, in addition to the Wander Franco extension that the Tampa Bay Rays gave out at the time, there wasn't a lot of room for him to be up on their major league roster. This allowed for the Marlins to sweep in and trade him at his lowest value, buying low and getting a player who in 2023 in the minors got on base at a .429 clip. This led him to make it to the majors in 2023 before putting together an amazing 2024 season, being the 5th highest on-base percentage amongst all players in the major leagues at .397.
Clement to left field, the base hit, and the Blue Jays walk it off.
Ernie Clement does not get on base. Ernie Clement is not a traditional Moneyball player. Yet, he still shows up as one of these key, unique players that are undervalued because of a different priority. That's his defense. Ernie Clement, for his career, was originally a 4th-round pick by Cleveland. Because he was not very productive offensively for the first 2 seasons of his career, he eventually was waived by the Guardians and then waived once again by Oakland. After signing a minor league deal in Toronto in which he could get some playing time at third base in the minors, he started to show what he could really do defensively. And that defense is what led him to becoming a major league player this past season. While not necessarily being the most productive, still only putting up a 95 OPS plus, some of the bat is actually starting to come around for Clement. But his real value comes on the defensive side, where he was ranked at 10th in defensive runs saved this season, and the 2nd ranked third baseman only behind Matt Chapman. With 3.4 WAR on a minor league contract, he becomes one of the most undervalued players in the league because of his defensive versatility and value.
Baez for the 2nd time today and set a new career best today. Struck him out. 11 strikeouts for Bailey Ober, a new career high.
Bailey Ober is the first pitcher we wanted to highlight, and that's because he doesn't really let anybody get on base. After bouncing around in the minors a couple seasons for the last couple years for Minnesota, he was finally given a shot to be a real starter for the Minnesota Twins this last season, and in this season, he put together his best season yet. Posting a 1 whip this past season, he was ranked 8th in walks and hits per innings pitched, right behind his teammate Joe Ryan this past season. Despite the 3.98 ERA, when our focus is more on the whip, he becomes a severely undervalued player. Only making $1.1 million this past season, He's one of the cheapest players you can get at this level of production in regards to not letting players get on base.
And that should do it. He did again. 98 again for Reynaldo Lopez.
Old veterans in breakout seasons are the exact type of player that you want to add to a team when you're attempting to get cheap value. In 2012, Reynaldo Lopez, the age of 18, signed out of the Dominican Republic with the Washington Nationals. He made his debut in 2016 and after the season was traded, along with Lucas Giolito, for Adam Eaton to the Chicago White Sox. For the next 7 seasons, he was an average starting pitcher. Eventually, in 2023, he was traded at the deadline to the Los Angeles Angels as they attempted to compete with their last season of Shohei Ohtani. After Ohtani's injury and everything fell apart, he was eventually cut and picked up by the Guardians. Didn't end up being much for him in Chicago or in Cleveland or also in Los Angeles, and this season he signed with the Braves for a 3-year deal worth $30 million. This past season, under a $4 million contract, Reynaldo Lopez had a breakout season, putting together the best season of his career at age 30. Lopez pitched at a 1.99 ERA in 25 starts, with a 1.06 whip and putting together 5.1 WAR. Lopez also sported a 2.08 ERA plus, the second highest of all starting pitchers this past season for the Atlanta Braves.
Carrying the flag on the bullpen cart, you can't get more American than that. Now you got to go close out a ball game.
There's making an entrance, and then there's making an entrance.
Relief pitchers are the epitome of Moneyball players. Often you can find a very cheap relief pitcher to be extremely productive from season to season. Derek Law is this perfect example. A journeyman reliever since being drafted in 2011 by the San Francisco Giants, Derek Law has never really put together any crazy seasons. An average ERA of 3.69, an average whip of 1.37. However, this past season, the Washington Nationals saw something in him as being a potential bullpen arm for them, signing him to a minor league contract this past year. After moving him up to the majors, Derek Law put together his best career season. 90 innings pitched in the bullpen at a 2.6 ERA, a 1.17 whip, and a career-high 1.9 WAR. Derek Law became an extremely productive pitcher in 2024 and could be their potential closer going into 2025.
I think he's, through this amount of time, he's the best pitcher ever. He's the best pitcher ever.
Hold on. In the history of the sport?
Yes.
The man who needs no introduction, Emmanuel Clase is the best reliever in all of baseball. Why might you think he'd be on a Moneyball roster? Well, that's because this past season, he only made $3 million putting together one of the greatest relief seasons we've ever seen. 0.61 ERA, 47 saves, 0.65 whip, and an ERA plus of 674. And being cheap as he is, he's the exact type of pitcher you want to build your bullpen around. You really can't get much better for the price that you would be paying. No relievers really get paid a lot. However, Clase does provide an extreme level of value at only $3 million this upcoming season.
Along the roster building process of this challenge, we ran into a couple caveats in order to be able to build this roster. Now, essentially, players underneath the age of 25 were always going to be considered more valuable as they were going to be on rookie young deals in which they're going to be underpaid in regards to their production. Players like Gunnar Henderson, even Bobby Witt prior to the contract kicking in, are examples of this. When we look at young players, they will end up having more value per dollar because they are paid on this basis. All of them will eventually be paid, meaning that they are not players that would normally be attainable under a Moneyball circumstance. And so the way that we decided to approach this is only allowing several of these players for each team in order to help build their roster. For example, this is considering those 2002 A's and saying that Miguel Tejada exists on this team because he is going to have that value anyways. Not every player is going to be a Moneyball player. We are essentially building around a roster. But in this case, we are still building from scratch. So we're using these core young players as our example for this. When it comes to contracts and being paid, another thing is arbitration years. And so in order to judge whether or not a player was too young or too old is whether or not they had those arbitration years left. If they were 25, say that we hit that age number that we were measuring for, if they had several years of arbitration left, we would still say that they could, be a part of it. But if they had not yet hit arbitration, this number would not work as a salary amount because it's not adjusted to the league. Basically, we were looking to approach avoiding league minimum players who are still under the age of 25. The third problem we ran into is roster balancing, in which, because we are doing 3 different teams, we are looking for the young, valuable, cheap assets that we have to apply to each team. Some positions have the same players come up multiple times. I think everybody can agree that Brent Rooker is very, very cheap for the value he provides. He would help all 3 of these teams, including on WAR, OPS+, as well as on base percentage. And so the way that we measured this is on a position basis, we took whichever one they ranked highest for in their stats. Say that somebody ranked 7th in on base percentage, but 9th for OPS+, they would end up on the Oakland A's in order to help kind of attribute that they are more effective for the A's than they would be for the Red Sox. How are we going to actually evaluate which one of these systems work the best in MLB The Show? Well, we are going to have to adjust and manipulate some variables because this is a simulation. This is not going to be the most accurate depiction of each of these teams. So in order to do this, we are going to try to remove some variables. Now, one thing I have to note, this is MLB The Show, this is a simulation engine, and it is not perfect. In fact, actually, there's many other ones that would work better. However, I like the visual kind of fun of an MLB The Show simulation and all the cool little numbers that we can end up getting. It's just more enjoyable to me. But the way we are going to remove variables is we are going to turn off injuries because we don't want from a season to season basis for different teams to have different injuries. That just kind of ruins the numbers, which will not really help us. We are going to turn off trades across the entire league. Therefore, every single team is going to be balanced on a sim to sim basis. We are also going to use a control team, and that control team is one team that has not been really adjusted from any of the teams. Now, there are 2 teams that we did not select any players from, if I'm recalling correctly, or at least have changed so little that it will not affect their team very much. That is the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Chicago White Sox. Now, the White Sox are so low that I know that MLB The Show cannot accurately simulate them. And so we're going to be using the Arizona Diamondbacks as our control team, not to show you whether or not these are affecting things, because they naturally are. We changed the Dodgers. That team is going to change how the Diamondbacks end up playing. But it's going to help give us a comparison of MLB The Show's stat system to what real life was. Because the Diamondbacks are a team that is going to be pretty much the same. We have their numbers for the season, and then we can actually compare them to MLB The Show's numbers and how they measure them. If it's a 20% increase of on-base percentage, if it's a 15% increase of, ERA, if it's a probably 50% decrease in stolen bases, because that's how MLB The Show works. All of those things will help us actually judge whether or not these numbers are accurate in depicting the actual stats of the season. And lastly, the most important one for anybody who is a stats nerd is going to be a large sample size. As I said, stats nerds are going to realize that MLB The Show is not the most accurate. And because of that, we've seen already in different simulations I've done crazy seasons from individual players that have changed and been unrealistic in how they've approached. So what we are going to be doing is simulating this over 100 times in order to try to get ourselves at least an average and a respectable number. We're going to show some of the highlights too, because I love simming this game. We get some crazy stats sometimes when we end up simulating seasons. And so I'll just be curious what we even get from some of these players. But these 100 sims will help us actually find out an average of where these players end up. up. This will take me time, so I'm going to show you one full season just to kind of walk you through how this works, and then we'll probably show some highlights and interesting seasons that we get as I measure the stats from the other simulations to come up with our true conclusion of which one of these three simulations or these three Moneyball methods are the most effective in building your team in MLB The Show. Now, I have to note, once again, this is not perfect. This is going to have a lot of variables that are not going to be measurable. In addition, there are a lot of different Moneyball-based algorithms and analytics-based algorithms we are not including in this simulation. If you would like to see some simulations where we include exit velocity or talking about launch angle and try to bake teams off of that, please leave a like below and we will try and add those simulations into future challenges if this is a video and a aspect that you found interesting. And so the next thing to do is to actually get into the simulation and let's run it and see how these teams actually perform on a season-to-season basis using MLB The Show and to figure out which Moneyball and analytics-based method is the most effective in building a roster. And when taking a look at the three teams in MLB The Show, the statistics and team rankings are actually pretty accurate to what the statistics that we built these teams off of. If we take a look at the A's, thinking of the on-base percentage and the ERA rating that we are judging them on, or WHIP, I guess more in this case, you'll see that they're ranked first in contact and third in pitching, while being last in defense and last in power, as these measurements that we've taken hold no value for power or defense. And speed, of course, that either. When we look at the Dodgers, you'll see that they are ranked 7th. They're a little bit better team. WAR is going to help encapsulate ratings a little bit more, but you'll also notice they have a higher balance on the defense and the speed than anything else. This is obviously still a very, very good team because of the WAR rating, but the defense and speed is a higher focus point because of WAR's balance in focus on speed and base running ability, as well as defensive stats. Lastly, our OPS plus and ERA plus has once again a focus on pitching and contact and power for the Red Sox. You'll actually think about it, if you go from era to era, you'll notice how much we've shifted into a focus of defense through the three formulas that we have strategized, from going from 30th in defense, where we have not related and valued power, to 29th in defense, where power and contact are all kind of a balance, to now actually having defense being a very important statistic in what we are measuring between the three teams. "23 days till the draft. Right now, the Red Sox are in the wild card race, 9 games out. If we take a look at the A's, they are in first place in the AL West. Kind of a shock to me, just looking at that right away, not expecting to see them play that well. And the Dodgers also first place. So right now the Red Sox are that second place, but they're also with the Orioles. It's funny, 47 and 29, 46 and 30, 46 and 29. All three teams being right next to each other statistically this far into the season. Why are there injuries? I turned them off. So I guess it can't be perfect, because even when you turn the sliders down to absolutely 0 injuries are still going to happen. We will just kind of take that as we can. Let's see if we got any all-stars from any of these teams. So all-stars. This is all-star voting. I just want to see who were the all-stars. Look at that up here. Okay, I guess not. Bailey Ober, all-star pitcher for our A's. We have Tanner Houck being an all-star over here for the Red Sox. If we go take a look at the NL side, it looks like Sean Manaea might be an all-star despite being 6 and 7 because of the 2.65 ERA. Very, very good start there. Relievers, I don't see any of our relievers for either team there. Jason Adam for the Dodgers ends up being in this all-star race for the first season. Taking a look at closers, Emmanuel Clase with a .77 whip. Just a crazy start. Even Ryan Walker right there as well. 2 good relievers off of the A's. On the NL side, it does not look like any of them made it. Catcher ratings, I don't see any of our guys. William Contreras here for the Dodgers. Taking a look at first base, don't see any Dodgers. I do see Jonah Bride for the Braves being up here. Actually, Carlos Santana is an interesting one. He was a player that could be on any of these rosters. If we look at his numbers, he technically should be. I was concerned because of MLB The Show's regression. Actually, if I look back at Carlos Santana, that his rating was going to go down a lot. And so I didn't know if I wanted to grab a 40-year-old to be or 38, but to be my backup first baseman, knowing his rating was going to depreciate like this. Apparently I should have. And so, we'll also keep a look on Carlos Santana on a consistent basis to see if he ends up doing anything crazy, because he is a player that should be in this, but I was afraid of the regression of MLB The Show. So we can look at a team like I guess, because of on-base percentage and ERA, I mean, we're really comparing him to a Jonah Bride or a Lamont Wade type thing, which I guess he's outperforming those guys to start off the season. Michael Busch is down here, though. On second base, Bryce Terang up here for the Dodgers, hitting 300 to start his season. And then Luis Renifo over here for the Red Sox, as well as Jose Iglesias in that running. Third base, Ernie Clement for the Dodgers. Okay. Dodgers putting together a pretty good team here. Don't see anybody from that. Xavier Edwards for the A's ends up being what will look like an all-star for him right now. He's hitting 347 to start off the season. 410 on base percentage. Crazy start for Xavier Edwards. And shortstop, nobody on that team. If we look at the left field position, Jarren Duran for the Dodgers. Once again, another Dodgers player. Jurickson Profar for the A's. Red Sox not getting as many all-stars, actually, if we take a look at this first team. Nobody on the center field position. Nobody from center field for them either. On the AL side, Brent Rooker for the Red Sox, who is honestly not doing... what am I talking about? I was looking at his average, was not looking at his home runs. 36 home runs halfway through the season, 893 OPS. Very, very good year so far for him. I would love to compare him on a consistent basis if he's going to hit for this much power. Lawrence Butler is also there, and Kerry Carpenter. Looks like the Dodgers are the team that ends up getting a lot more of the credit so far. They are the better of the three, but that was also expected. So after the All-Star break, we'll move forward now and look at the end of the season. So September call-up start is going to be weird because they're just going to be me picking 3 players to basically play for the end of the season. I might actually have it on auto in the future, but these players might create outliers if I end up bringing them in for players that are at positions that are really, really well. So what I might do on a consistent basis is grab the 3 lowest players from each 40-man and add them up that way. That way you're 2 lowest from each team. That way I don't have to worry as much about messing up the rosters, as we'll just bring in guys that will hopefully not get minutes or play for any of these teams. It's going to be a little difficult, especially when I'm looking at this team getting, with the injuries already, but thankfully there's like 60 overalls on each team that should not play, you know what I mean? So we're in a position where thankfully it won't affect them too much, I believe. If they get 1 at bat or so, it's not that big of a deal. And so, as we finish the first season, the Red Sox go 98-64 as a wild card team. The A's go 104-58 and win their division. And the Dodgers go 90-72 and win their division. That is, I would say, was not expecting the A's to be that good on their first sim. Was not expecting that great of a season from any of these teams, really. I was going to be thinking we were going to be sitting wild card races for all of these teams. But apparently, these rosters are all very, very good. Let's go take a look at the awards after this first season and see if anybody gets it. Well, there we go. Brent Rooker is the American League MVP, hitting 54 home runs, 258, 126 RBIs for the Boston Red Sox. Nobody on the NL side for any of our teams. Tanner Houck was 3rd in the Cy Young. And Xavier Edwards wins the batting title, hitting 335. Oh, it also helps. Freddie Freeman is on the Orioles. No wonder that team is so good. Reliever of the year, Derek Law was in that race for the Dodgers, and they sent him down for the playoffs because the game is dumb. He pitched 193 and a 1.24 whip, and they sent him down because, as I said, game dumb. I don't know if there's any other super important ones that I have to look at. Let's take a look at league leaders. Brent Rooker with home runs and RBIs. And Xavier Edwards over here with a batting average of 335, also 316 here for Jurickson Profar. On the NL side, no Dodgers in that top part of the list. Taking a look at hits, 200 for Freddie Freeman. That might have been overpowered. Teoscar is also there. The Orioles are stacked. So that will be a team to look at every single season. Xavier Edwards, a very, very good year. Luis Renifo, Profar. Taking a look at the NL side, nobody really there. Doubles, Jarren Duran, and nobody from either team on doubles. On triples, nobody there. And on home runs, Dodgers, Kyle Schwarber hits 37. The Red Sox have Brent Rooker with 54 to lead the way there. RBIs, Brent Rooker once again. And Kyle Schwarber second for RBIs in the NL. If we let's actually look at each of these pitching rotations and lineups now. We're going to start with pitching. Normally I go the other way around, but we'll start with pitching. So taking a look at the Red Sox, they have 273, 116 from Toby Myers. Bad season from Brian Hoeing, 484, 157 whip. 334, 94 for Gaddis. 290, 102 for Heron. 167, 148 for Taylor Scott. Kirby Yates was rough, not very good, which is funny because he is one of the best players this past season. And so I would think metrics-wise, you would think he would be pretty good. But hey, that's MLB The Show. Hopefully this is not a consistent thing for the Red Sox. Ronaldo Lopez, 364, 13, 372, 133 for Justin Steele. Christopher Sanchez, 397, 125 whip. Tanner Houck was obviously in the Cy Young race, 267, 105 whip, and 349, 128 for Ronel Blanco. If we take a look at their lineup, we're going to see on the bench, Grichuk, not great. Fitzgerald was pretty good in those at-bats he was given. O'Hearn was only given 52, not really that special. 250 for Carantini off of the bench. When it comes to their lineup, we see Luis Renifo, 267, 16 home runs. I should actually look through this way so that way we can see all of their numbers. As he hits, we're really looking for OPS here. 722 OPS for Luis Renifo. Jose Iglesias gets himself a 700 OPS, hitting for 266, 302 on base. Not very good on base, but looks like he at least hit for a little bit of power in this season. Brent Rooker, obviously MVP, 873 OPS. Slowed down a little bit from where he was at the beginning of the season. Still ends up amazing season for him. Kerry Carpenter, I'll have to look over here. 276. This was a platoon bat as well. 343 on base percentage, 896 OPS. He hit 30 home runs in his platoon. Fantastic season from him in order to be able to do that. Jonah Bride was another player that was really, really well, outperformed a lot. 28 home runs for Jonah Bride, which is amazing for him, hitting 868 OPS. Kind of our fluky player, I guess, for them. Wallner, not really that impressive, still hit 22 home runs. 294 for Lawrence Butler with 27 home runs, 875 OPS. Joey Bart, for the catcher position, I'll be honest, very, very difficult to find good catchers. Joey Bart was pretty good in this case. 271, 415 slugging. Good season from him. And Ramon Urias, who was actually one of the worst players that we put on this in regards to this past season and how they performed. But not too bad. 120 hits. Still had almost an 800 OPS. So the Red Sox are actually in a good position. It looks like the only person who really kind of underperformed this season was Matt Wallner, which gives me some hope for how this team will perform in the future simulations. I don't believe there were any players that got sent down. Very, very good year. I actually need to look at standings here because now that I'm looking at this, I think I made the Orioles too overpowered. 121 and 41? What? Hey, that's the trades that we made. When they get like the fifth best Dodger, or the fifth and seventh best Dodger, it ends up still being enough. You know what I mean? We played the game as we were supposed to. We just didn't realize we created a monster in the Orioles. Okay. Next team. The A's. Let's take a look at their pitching rotation. So, 271-108 for Spencer Schwellenbeck. Very, very good season. Austin Adams did not pitch. 281-113 for him. Kevin Kelly, 349-106. Good for him. Ryan Walker, a fantastic season. 134-104 whip in 33 innings. Hudson was rough. A very bad 7 ERA, 141 whip. And Clase was immaculate. Emmanuel Clase is insane. The fact that this did not win a reliever of the year is crazy. 46 saves on a 1.33 ERA. Crazy bullpen. Joe Ryan, 295-108. Bailey Ober, 281-105. Pepio was not good. 451-131. Nick Pivetta, great season. And Cutter Crawford. This pitching staff, fantastic for the A's. That must have really carried them a lot, I would assume. Though I need to check who did they send down. Jose Miranda, 264-304 on base percentage. Not great, but decent for a third baseman, which was a really, really difficult position for us to actually find for them. Mark Canha also got sent down. 354 on base. Very, very good. We are going to, by the way, because of simming, I am going to let these players sit down in AAA during playoff runs, but I am very happy to see how they performed in the regular season because those are the numbers we actually care about. But let's look at the actual lineup. Lamont Wade, 301 average. We might have to look at on base for all these guys. 397 on base percentage for Lamont Wade. Willie Castro, 320 on base for him, 102 hits. Good season. Jacob Stallings, in his at-bats, 300 on base percentage. Palacios, 364 on base percentage. Brett Harris did not play. And if we go to our starting lineup, we have a 400 on base percentage for Xavier Edwards. Fantastic season, 189, 335, got a batting title. Jake Fraley got himself a 341 on base percentage. Profar over 400 on base percentage for him. We have a Michael Busch 300. That was a terrible year. I talked Michael Busch up, but not a good year for him. Still hit 25 home runs, thankfully. Spencer Horwitz, 356 on base percentage, gets him pretty far. Ivan Herrera, 350 for him. He's their young guy that we made in their core. Jesse Winker, 400 on base percentage for him. Victor Robles, 333 for him. So Michael Busch was the disappointment for them. But wow, amazing season from all the A's. I was not expecting 104 wins. I'll be honest, on base percentage is still king if we were to take a one-size sample. Now let's take a look at the Dodgers and take a look at their pitching rotation. So first, Zach Littell, 245, very, very good. Jason Adam was in the reliever of the year race. Hit 99 innings, 109, 100, 1 whip. That is crazy for Jason Adam. Amazing season. Holton, 352, 122. 269, 128 from Buck Farmer, who was very, very good. Luke Weaver, not so much, 631. And the closing spot, I would assume, 6 blown saves. Who else did they move to closer then? Or did they send somebody down? They must have sent somebody down. Oh yeah, Derek Law, who they sent down despite hitting 42 saves. We'll actually call him up for the playoffs because that's ridiculous. All right, so taking a look at the actual pitching rotation. Sean Manaea, 272, 104 whip. Michael Wacha, 349, 129. Brady Singer, not that great of a season. Michael King, 351, 122 whip, and Fetty 387 126 whip. Basically, looking at it, I think the A's pitching staff got the superiority in this case, but the bullpen was good. And interestingly enough, every single team had one terrible bullpen arm. Luke Weaver, Kirby Yates, and Brian Hudson, all really, really underperforming for the season. When we take a look at the lineups, we have to take a look at the bench first because they're always going to move guys because of their, they're basically their depth in their system. So David Hamilton got sent down. He never played because they have so many shortstops. But so not really a good measurement for him. Josh Smith did 357 on base percentage, 302 average. What was his WAR? 1 in only the 30 games that he played. So very, very good. Now, when we get to the actual lineup, Otto Lopez, 276 average. We're going to look at WAR a lot with these guys. 0.7 as a bench player who played in 60 games is not bad. Zach Neto, up to an 89 overall. Didn't honestly play that well. I wonder what he did defensively to get 2 WAR. So, WAR still brought in a lot of value. Fermin, not really that good of a year, but did he play good defense? Did. I'll be curious if any of these guys even get negative WAR. Bryce Terang got himself an all-star earlier in the year, 289, 344 on base. Very, very good year from him. 5 WAR. That is better than he had for his past season. Jarren Duran, who was their best player, hit 172 hits, 17 home runs, 844 OPS, who had a total of 5.5 WAR on the season. Very, very good season from him. He got an all-star as well. Actually, I guess Contreras is their best player. Contreras, 290, 19 home runs, 827 OPS, and a 6.1 WAR season from him. Schwarber hit 37 home runs, which should be enough to just get him a lot. 2.7 WAR, despite not being a fantastic defensive player. Ernie Clement is kind of one of these unique guys that we found. Was kind of one of the outliers, and he really stood out for them. 264, did a really, really good year, but 0.4 WAR. Would have thought he would have done a little bit better with the hitting stats that he had, but I guess he didn't really get on base. IKF, not a good year from him. 223, 269 OBP, but a 0.5 WAR. JJ Bleday put together a decent season. 737 OPS and a negative WAR, actually. So this is one of the worst players they had out there, because I guess as a DH didn't perform well enough. Matt Vierling here, and also why was Bleday out there instead of Schwarber? I guess that's the question. That should have been flipped the whole season. Matt Vierling with a 260, 307 OBP, and 8.7 WAR, and Ryan Mountcastle, 236, 14 home runs, and a 0.6 WAR. They were kind of the worst team, which is interesting, because I think when you looked at the rosters originally, you would have thought that the Dodgers were the best team because of the defensive ratings, but I still think on-base percentage and ERA and WHIP are the most important factors. If we take a look at the Diamondbacks, they went 83 and 79 this season, which is pretty close to what they did in real life. Not as good, but we can look at the team stats as well in order to try to take some of these metrics. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to first sim the postseason. The Red Sox won their wild card series and will be taking on the unbeatable Baltimore Orioles. We'll let the A's fix. The Dodgers win their division series. The Red Sox win their division series and will be taking on the A's or the Twins. The A's have won, so it'll be A's versus Red Sox in the ALCS and Dodgers Phillies in the NLCS. Dodgers are eliminated by the Phillies. The A's have won the ALCS, so we will get A's, and the A's win the World Series. What? The A's? I should have had them up. Jesse Winker, World Series MVP, postseason MVP, goes to Brandon Marsh. On the other side are Jurickson Profar. What? You gotta be kidding me. That A's team was enough? All right. Guys, after the first sim, you know what matters the most? Moneyball. Moneyball. Moneyball is still the most effective method. Now, let's run 100 sims and see if anything changes. Because apparently, Moneyball is the most effective method to building the best possible roster in MLB The Show. That is insanity to me. The Baltimore Orioles won 121 games and didn't make it to the World Series. Wow. Wow. And so on a season-to-season basis, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually keep track of this from season to season on a few different things. We're going to look at record, we're going to look at average, ERA, and we're going to compare it to the 2024 season. We're going to compare it to our control team and the D-backs. And then we're also just going to keep track of best records as well as World Series winners, all that, so we can see how many World Series we actually win with any of these three teams. and just see what ends up becoming the best and following trends essentially with our stats. So we'll kind of be able to highlight really, really good seasons in this progress. But as I simulate the next 100 seasons, I'm really only going to show you some outlier stats because I think it's going to be really fun. Like we just saw that crazy 121 win season from the Orioles. We'll probably show any other World Series that we might get with the A's. We might show, or with any other team. We might show World Series. We might show crazy stat seasons and record seasons at different times. But for the most part, I'm going to get to computing for however long this takes. And I'll see you at the end so we can actually judge and measure our final results. 100 sims down, and several days later, we finally have our results of our sim. We got ourselves a lot of crazy seasons to be able to start, and even season 1 that we first simulated that you saw the entirety of it was one of the crazier sims that we got. Now, thankfully the game actually balances itself out over time and you do get more of a realistic simulation experience. However, we did get some very interesting results from season to season and got some interesting numbers from different players. So just to preface, every season takes about 5 to 7 minutes to simulate depending on how many injuries we get in order to kind of adjust for that September call-ups that we get to get ourselves to the 26-man roster. Now, several seasons would take way longer to simulate because I kept a very in-depth set of numbers in order to try to give us the most interesting level of detail when it came to stats, awards, as well as to get our actual numbers to run our analysis when it came to the end of our simulation. Starting with individual seasons, I really wanted to focus a little bit on the award winners. It's something that we end up spending a lot of time in most of our rebuilds on. And so from across the board, we actually had a pretty good variety of award winners, though there were some favorites. Aaron Judge won a lot of MVPs. Shohei Ohtani won a lot of MVPs. Brent Rooker surprisingly won a lot of MVPs, but that comes with the territory of now playing on a team that actually gets you a lot more opportunities to get RBIs. When it came to Cy Youngs, you also saw Spencer Strider kind of kick his way into there, somebody who would not have actually been attributed to a normal simulation because he didn't play in 2024, but he was in the rosters this year and therefore actually did contribute for the Braves in this season. We even got some interesting awards as we ended up getting a good amount of awards from Paul Skeens in his rookie season. I mean, he is one of the most productive pitchers and one of the best statistical pitchers this past season. And then also a surprise from Jackson Churio getting several as well. Because I took track of all the numbers, there were actually some really good standout seasons that I saw throughout the entire sim. Starting with our top 5 seasons that we ended up having, these are the ones that I thought were the biggest and most influential, really interesting seasons that we saw from a top-end standpoint. Ronald Acuna had a 40-40-40 season where he also won a batting title and an MVP, pulling off 11.6 WAR in one of his simulations. When it came to pitchers, we actually saw an MVP or several MVPs from Tyler Glasnow, who had one Cy Young that ended up giving him a triple crown, 1.7 ERA, 251 strikeouts. Just a fantastic season from Tyler Glasnow, who was moved to the Cardinals in this sim. We also had a triple crown from Julio Rodriguez, who pulled off an MVP, getting 194 hits, 38 home runs, and 59 doubles on his way to 12.2 WAR, one of the best seasons that I've seen besides our, famous Mariners rebuild. If you have not seen that, go watch what Julio does in that video. We also have Shohei Ohtani, who pulled off a MVP Cy Young season where he got 255 strikeouts, 56 home runs, 41 doubles, and pulled off 12.6 WAR, which was effectively the best season that we got from any player total in WAR's consideration. But my actual MVP best season was from Brent Rooker, who pulled off a triple crown, MVP, 227 hits, 71 home runs, 47 doubles, and 155 RBIs in one season for the Boston Red Sox. Never did I think that Brent Rooker was going to be the top guy, but I guess he was really, really good in this simulation. I also kept track of our top 5s across multiple statistical categories, trying to just focus on the ones that I thought were the most interesting. And in that, we got some really good seasons from different players and actually got some diversity too. Some guys fell off the list due to some of the, normal guys ended up getting really, really good seasons. I saw a season where Ahmed Rosario had 212 hits, but obviously not as much as the normal guys like Freddie Freeman, Vlad Guerrero, and of course, Luis Arias getting 233 hits in his best season for a batting title. Home runs really came from Brent Rooker in his aforementioned 71 home run season, but the rest of the way was really led by the New York Yankees players. Soto, Judge were pretty much on a consistent basis volleying for that top home run leader and getting the home run champ every year. It was pretty much Rooker, Soto, and Judge, and on the other side of the board, it was almost always Marcell Ozuna, who also got 63 home runs in a season. And while I normally count extra bases, I mainly focus on just getting doubles for this stat category. Because I was counting home runs separately, I thought counting doubles would be an interesting way of doing it as well. And we actually got the record for most doubles in a season ever, with Xavier Edwards getting 65 doubles in one of our seasons. There was a pretty good balance on a consistent basis of a lot of guys being up there. Bobby Witt was almost around 55, between 50 and 55 doubles every season that he ended up playing well, of course. But we also got 60 from Jackson Churio and a couple other guys, including a really interesting season from Wenceel Perez, who had 58 one year. Otherwise, normally the normal guys who got a lot of extra bases, who aren't necessarily home run hitters, were on the top of the doubles leaderboard. Stolen bases are not necessarily a stat I normally focus much on in MLB The Show because the numbers are pretty low respectively, but I think with the resurgence of stolen bases in the major leagues, it's still a very interesting number to focus on. And so I ran through and actually was counting stolen bases because it helped being the A's and actually seeing Victor Robles win these steals several times so I could get that alert for it. But the actual best player was Jake McCarthy, who was, interestingly enough, one of the players we could have grabbed and put on our roster for one of the teams, but we just decided not to grab him, and he might have been very, very valuable to add to the team because he ended up having a fantastic simulation one year, getting 65 steals in one season. Strikeouts come often from the usual suspects when it comes to pitchers. Spencer Strider and Paul Skeens normally lead the way by a long shot. We did get a nice season from Garrett Crochet, who pulled off 268 strikeouts, but the thing with strikeouts at MLB The Show is I feel like because they only ever pitched 33 games, you're never going to see an opportunity to get a Garrett Cole 2019 type season. I've almost never seen simulating somebody get over 300 strikeouts, so Spencer Strider's 282 strikeouts in 1 year was a fantastic pitching season. Another record broken was Emmanuel Clase getting 63 saves in one season. While he wasn't necessarily always the top save getter, because he was on the A's, that was a team that actually performed very, very well in this sim. Therefore, 63 saves, 59 saves. He was consistently near the top of the leaderboard, actually pulling in a ton of Delivery Man of the Year awards, which is a realistic expectation knowing that he did win that this past season. Though there were still good years from Raisel Iglesias, Chris Martin, and Griffin Jacks, other pitchers who ended up getting a good amount of saves throughout their entire simulations. Where Emmanuel Clase did not necessarily shine as much in the reliever department was the ERA. Now, I don't focus on this, and I don't normally have this for starting pitchers, but I was seeing some crazy seasons from some of the relievers who were winning Reliever of the Year awards. Cade Smith ended up getting a .18 ERA in one season. I think he had 50-some saves, and .1 meaning he only gave up one run all year. Hunter Harvey, .32, Danny Colombe, .34, all of these pitchers putting up pretty much 40 to 50 save seasons and getting under .5 ERA. Let's just say that ERA for relievers in MLB The Show is a little bit broken. Going down the list, I did keep track of every single MVP, every single Cy Young, and so I was able to actually get a good measurement of how everybody actually did from season to season. Because we were keeping the AL and the NL for each award separate, I was able to get a good amount of numbers, so we were able to see that some teams were really getting really good production from across the board. Surprisingly, the Arizona Diamondbacks pulled off 5 different MVPs in their lineup. They did also get a Cy Young from Zach Gallen, but 5 different MVPs across our 100 simulations means that they really had a pretty productive offense the entire time, which is, in line with their roster and their team in real life, because their pitching staff was more the disappointment this past season. A 4.62 ERA this past year for the Diamondbacks. The lineup itself, tons of power, tons of contact, a lot of production from them, and the 5 MVPs are a sign of how well they were evenly balanced across the entire lineup. The other obvious super team was the Baltimore Orioles, who we saw win 121 games in their first simulation. They ended up getting 6 different award winners, just as the Diamondbacks did, with 3 different Cy Young winners and 3 different MVPs. The 3 Cy Young winners, Corbin Burnes, Kyle Bradish, as well as Grayson Rodriguez, all won multiple Cy Youngs, in fact. Consistent pitching across the board. Sadly for them, Corbin Burnes is no longer on that team. Welcome to the Diamondbacks, Corbin Burnes. In the lineup, they had 2 MVPs that are from the Orioles originally, Gunnar Henderson and Anthony Santander, both racking up 5 MVPs in the sim. Teoscar Hernandez was one of the players who was traded there in order to make the teams work out for our rebuild, and he got an MVP himself, giving them 6 award winners. 2 other teams also won 6 awards, and those 2 teams aren't going to be normal teams, but in fact, 2 of the teams that we built. The Oakland Athletics had a all-star pitching staff. Apparently, drafting for WHIP builds an amazing pitching staff. They had 6 different Cy Young Award winners, including 11 from Bailey Ober over that time. This means that they won a total of 20 different Cy Youngs across the 100 sims. 20% of Cy Young Award winners came from the Oakland Athletics. The other team with 6 award winners came from the 18 MVPs that came from Brent Rooker, but also another amazing pitching staff of the Boston Red Sox, who had 5 Cy Young winners in their pitching staff. Now, awards and trends are something that we looked at as a fun element to try to get ourselves an idea of what the simulations could get, but really now we need to get into the actual data. Which teams were most effective in the sim, and which teams ended up performing on a consistent basis better than the others? I tracked playoff appearances across all of the teams across the entire major leagues, and the team that was surprisingly the most effective at making it to the playoffs were the Oakland A's. Our Moneyball team only missed the playoffs 1 time, and that 1 time they actually went 89-73, only missing it by a game. Normally it's a record that is not worth missing the playoffs over, unless you're considering this year for the Arizona Diamondbacks. The other top contenders were our normal suspects. You could see Baltimore, Philadelphia, Milwaukee was up there as the top team of the NL Central. We actually didn't see any AL Central teams up there because they were clearly evenly balanced across the entire division, meaning we didn't have a runaway leader in that division at any point. The Dodgers won a lot, the Diamondbacks won a lot, and the Padres won a lot. Actually, the NL West was extremely productive at producing 3 playoff teams. And actually, the NL East was too, but there was more of a balance across the lower half of that board than the upper half. The bottom half of the playoffs came from the usual suspects as well. The only difference is when they were on the bottom end, they were almost guaranteed not to make it to the playoffs. Because we saw 3 teams almost guaranteed every year out of the AL East, it was very rare to see any of the other 2 teams of the AL East make it to the playoffs. In fact, you can see based off of this graphic here that we had, of the bottom 10 teams, pretty much 2 or 1 from each division with a little bit of a leeway at different spots. The Marlins, Angels, Red Sox, and Rays never made it to the playoffs once. Meanwhile, we did get 1 playoff appearance from the Giants, 3 from the Pirates, 4 from the Blue Jays, 4 from the Nationals, and 11 from the Tigers. Now, I skipped the Rockies because the Rockies are actually an interesting story. The Rockies made it to the playoffs 2 times, and in fact, they made it to the World Series 2 times. While losing both times, it was still a very interesting story to see them continue October by missing the playoffs every season except for the 2 that they made it and going all the way to the World Series in those 2 appearances. In fact, I was shocked to even see them make it to the playoffs at all in any sim, thinking that they would be at the bottom of the NL West, but the NL West was actually kind of more average than you would assume on most bases. While we kept track of our 3 teams plus our control team for most of the simulation, I did also keep track of the other teams as well, not wanting to lose and keep yourself an idea of what they were relative to your expectations in MLB The Show. However, it is very clear by the end of this which team was the best, and it's not even close. After our 100 sims, our runaway leader was most clearly the Oakland Athletics. They won 31 different World Series after making the playoffs 99 times. In fact, they went 31-10, meaning that they actually made it to the World Series 41 times. They were the best team by a long shot, but there were also other teams that made it to the World Series a lot. Boston won 15 times, Baltimore won 13 times, the Phillies won 6 times, and the Dodgers also won 6 times. We actually saw all of our teams win more than 5 World Series, which is a very interesting dynamic, thinking that we built all 3 of those teams from scratch. Some of the more interesting teams that were not ours were Baltimore, who obviously had that really good season of 121-41 in their first simulation. They ended up making it to the World Series 26 times, winning it 13 times and losing it 13 times. One of the more unlucky teams who made it to the World Series many times were the Philadelphia Phillies, who made it 31 times as well, however, only won 6 World Series in that time, most of the time being faced off against Baltimore, Oakland, or Boston. Heavy balance on the AL side means that we need a loser on the NL side. And besides the teams that never won a World Series, the team with the worst win rate inside the entire World Series were the Milwaukee Brewers, who went 1-7, continuing that balance of NL teams being a little bit outplayed by their AL counterparts. So which team was actually the best built team? I think the answer is pretty obvious. After our 100 sims, our Oakland A's won an average of 99 games per season. Winning and making it to the playoffs 99 of 100 times, they were by far the most efficient and effective team in our entire sim. With an average of 274 and an ERA of 3.22, this team was consistently around the top 5 for batting average as well as for ERA almost every single season. While they pulled in 0 MVPs, they pulled in 20 Cy Youngs, which gave them a total of 31 World Series championships, something that would not be matched by anybody by far. Surprisingly, the LA Dodgers were not actually that good of a team when we ended up going through the simulation. 89-73 is still pretty effective to make it to the playoffs pretty often, and they still did on a consistent basis. But we were looking for a little bit more when you're considering the defensive value that we were bringing with that team. However, because we focused on defense, you actually saw a lower average as well as a lower ERA for these teams. An average of 2.62 and an ERA of 3.41 meant that this team didn't actually end up being as productive as we would have originally assumed. With only 1 MVP coming from Kyle Schwarber and 2 Cy Youngs coming from Sean Manaea as well as Michael King, they were not really award winners either. No super productive seasons from any individual players. They did thankfully pull out 6 World Series in this time, meaning it was still one of the best teams we built, but I don't necessarily know if the strategy would work on a consistent basis if this is what we're trying to use our data off of. Now, it's important to note that in most sims, if you were actually to try to judge by WAR and value, we might be looking at a much cheaper team. Somebody who would have Tariq Skubal, and this is part of the problem of having our young players and balancing things out. I believe that MLB The Show doesn't actually care that much for defensive and base running value, which is what WAR is, giving an effective bonus to across the stats. The last team, our OPS plus and ERA plus team, the Boston Red Sox, were another super effective team. While they averaged a 93-69 record, not as close to the A's, that is still a super good playoff team on a consistent basis and an effective improvement over what their roster would be right now. Averaging 264, I wouldn't say the bats were necessarily as productive as the effective pitching staff would help by lowering their ERA to a 3.34. While there was still some production from individual players who had super high OPS pluses, I can note that when building this team, OPS plus is really hard to find a lot of value at besides, for example, Brent Rooker. Brent Rooker, coming in with 18 MVPs, really helped out Boston as well, as they had 18 MVPs and 15 Cy Youngs, with 33 of the 200 total awards they had the opportunity of getting in the AL. They also won 15 World Series, but not only did they win 15 World Series, the Boston Red Sox went 15-0 in the World Series. If they made it, they won it every time. The Phillies were the main culprit to this, but they also beat up on the Padres as well as the Brewers several times. Consistently, if the Red Sox were there, it was probably going to be the Phillies, and they were not going to be very happy about it. Which Moneyball method was the best? The original. The original is still the most effective method, at least in MLB The Show. Now, on-base percentage, whip might have more of a focus in this game, but at least it is very clear if you wanted to build a team that is going to be valued, on-base percentage and whip are still extremely undervalued by Major League Baseball today. After this, we have to ask ourselves, what does any of it mean? Well, I think there's a few things that we need to actually consider when it comes to rebuilding teams and what you would end up doing when you are rebuilding your own team. Apparently, because Moneyball has such a large value in regards in comparison to the other two strategies, using on-base percentage and whip still has a lot of value when it comes from pitcher to pitcher and batter to batter. You can actually see when we look at some of our whip charts specifically that players who have really high ERAs still have some pretty low whip ratings, which was not what we did in our original and Moneyball rebuild when we did this the first time. Whip has become more of our focus because it truly is a more accurate simulation of pitching. Could we use any of this to expect and get 2025 numbers? Maybe. I would say that if you're in fantasy baseball, Bailey Ober might be a good pick, but I can't necessarily say for certain. Whip is not always going to be a transferable number. It's the same thing with on-base percentage. Would I love to project that Xavier Edwards is going to be on-base percentage over 400 this year? Yes, I would love to be able to say that, but we can't know for certain. Based on the numbers and metrics we have, he is a good investment. It's the same thing that goes for a lot of the other guys we put on that team. Jerkson Profar, Jesse Winker, players that really outperformed what their salary was. But our big question is, why did this team dominate? Why were they so effective and so much better than the other two teams? Well, I think MLB The Show's simulation has a bit of a problem. It overvalues ERA and pitching. Because the team's focus was so much on whip and pitching, we ended up actually being able to put most of our value into the pitching staff. That was really more expensive than getting on base percentage. Because we focus so much on that, because MLB The Show has such a large difference in ERA, we were getting a very high weighted, advantage in regards in comparison to the other simulations. If we look at the Arizona Diamondbacks as our control team, you can see that their ERA dropped from 4.62 to 4.78, a massive decrease for them to end up getting a actually decent pitching season while we kept everything the same. I would assume that you would see something similar. Now, obviously, numbers are going to adjust when you effectively change the ERA back into MLB The Show for Oakland and bring them back up to a more 3.6, 3.7 rate where they no longer are putting together one of the best pitching staffs ever. In addition, we also have to acknowledge that we cherry-picked pretty much all of the cheap players off of these teams. Realistically, in an actual Moneyball rebuild, you would not be able to get 5 of these players. You'd be able to get 1, maybe 2. In fact, oftentimes these pitchers and these players would not necessarily be available. Bailey Ober is not going to be available off the Twins anytime soon. And the same thing goes for Nick Pivetta or Joe Ryan. These are pitchers that are valuable to their teams because of the whip that they provide right now. Could we grab 1? Maybe. Are they going to be as cheap as we did get them for? Probably not. And so cherry picking is going to end up making these numbers look a little bit higher as well. Why then was the on-base percentage method so effective? It still ended up providing a very, very good offense, even if we're not looking at the pitching staff and we're looking at batters. it's pretty certain to say that Jesse Winker is not going to bring in a lot of money this year. In fact, many of the batters that we put on that roster not going to provide a lot of value. We actually went pretty low on the charts in order to try to pick the players that would end up on Oakland. And that's because I think on-base percentage works a little bit differently as a metric than you think when it comes to this simulation versus even our last one. When we did our first Moneyball rebuild back in May, June, sometime around there, we ended up using a metric and got the average on-base percentage, where I believe I came to about a .312 average on-base percentage across the league in order to get ourselves that metric. Now, this team, essentially, because I did keep track of it, got a .356 average on-base percentage over the entirety of the sim. The reason that matters so much is because when we talk about on-base percentage, you have to remember how much that influences a lineup. The average lineup gets around 4.1 times. Now, the reason on-base percentage is so valuable is because we can attribute this number to every at-bat. While .356 is a 14% increase over the previous on-base percentage, you have to remember that does not mean that we would get a 4.67 times around the bat, a 14% increase, because every single batter is then actually being relayed exponentially. This means that we're not getting a 14% increase, but we're getting a 1.14%, I guess, exponential increase, which leads to around 5 times. If every batter has a 14% chance or higher getting on base, that means every time we get around the bases, every batter has a 14% increase. And so on-base percentage becomes exponentially higher about getting around the lineup, meaning that the Oakland A's were essentially getting around the lineup 5 times, where every other team was getting around their lineup 4 times. It was a significant advantage in order to really create a reason why this team scored so many runs. They were always on base, walking a lot, getting hits a lot. And because other teams were not getting on base, because they were not walking and they were not getting hits, they ended up dropping a lot from that 4.1. This strategy is way too effective for MLB The Show because I believe that the hits per 9 and walks per 9 numbers are the most important stats when it comes to pitching and selecting pitchers in the game. And there were other strategies that we implemented. ERA plus and OPS plus still proved to be extremely effective, though I would say that on a consistent basis, you're going to want to have some of the stars as well as the cheap players when it comes to those numbers. While we got some productivity from those guys, having a little bit more value would help. In addition, if Oakland's not there, Boston is going to play better. The other one that ends up being a little bit messy is the Dodgers. Really, the pitching staff was nowhere near the top end of their WAR ratings because pitchers with high WAR are often young pitchers that can pitch a lot, as well as pitchers who strike out a lot of batters. This means that this past year, almost all of these guys are on rookie deals and very cheap, and were not available for us to get picked. We couldn't take Hunter Green. We couldn't take Tariq Skubal. And even in the ERA Plus, we couldn't take Paul Skeens. If you were to create a super team of rookies, I bet you that this WAR rating would really, really help. But that's not going to get you the cheap value of anything. Another thing I found very, very interesting while simulating that has helped kind of come up with a little bit of a theory is that I believe that MLB The Show's rebuilds are actually not independent of each other. I simmed over 2 days in order to try to get a lot of these numbers, and we simmed 65 times in the first day and 35 times in the second day. But if you look at the numbers, you'll notice that we had in a season 1 something very, very ridiculous happen. The 121 win Baltimore Orioles. But as we moved down that list, things started to balance out and get more normal. However, the instant that we switched over to the next day, the numbers changed. They no longer were reflective of those numbers, and we got another jump and boost in random numbers. In fact, I was noticing trends. There were days where I would get a series where we would get a bunch of 100-win teams from the A's, and then we'd be down to the 90s. We would see a bunch of missed playoff opportunities from the Dodgers, and then they would be back up. In fact, you would see award winners come and move in trends as well. There were times where I saw somebody win an award 4 or 5 times in a row and then not win it again for another 20 seasons. We actually can look at that with Brent Rooker, who won a lot in the beginning and then didn't win any in the middle and then started winning them again near the end of the simulations. I'm starting to think that one of the reasons we get really, really crazy numbers in our simulations that we do is because when you start up a game, you might get a more random actual generation of statistics. But the further they go, they actually rely on each other to help balance itself out, so you get more realistic numbers. This is why we often see our crazy simulations early on in our rebuilds around 2026, 2027, which is normally around a time where I might be starting the second day of resimming and simulating it, doing all of our work. And you see almost nothing crazy when we get to the 2030s, because by that time, I'm just running through simulations on a consistent basis. I'd love to hear what other people think, because I noticed this while doing it, but I don't know if I'm getting something independent than what other people are seeing. I'm just noticing that there's a trend here, and it doesn't seem normal. It doesn't feel random, but with randomness comes randomness. I mean, trend lines could just exist, or these could actually be just random numbers that we are getting, and this isn't actually a trend. It just felt awkward and weird, and I wanted you guys to think about it too, and see if any of your sims are getting results like this as well. And so, what is the actual best strategy to rebuilding a team? I do think on base percentage and whip are beneficial to adding players at the end of your lineup. You're never going to be able to actually build a team solely around this because these players aren't going to be available. Because most of the time, the leaders in whip and on base percentage are young players that are just good. Effectively, the best strategy, if we look at award winners like Jackson Churio, Paul Skeens, Spencer Strider, Tariq Skubal, are just young guys. And because you're not always going to be able to get the best players with on base percentage and whip on every single roster, truly the best strategy is still to draft well. Draft well, get young players that have a lot of value, but supplement that roster with on base percentage and whip. Now, I would still like to see how we could end up doing this in the future using other strategies. Will anything be close to as effective as the Moneyball method? I don't know, and I'd be curious to see if you have any ideas of what could end up working better than that method. So, if you have any ideas or concepts that you want me to try, put it down in the comments below. But also, tell me what you think. Do you think that we made any mistakes in regards to our simulation? Things that you'd like to see us do again in order to try to recreate this more effectively if you do not believe that all the rules that I put in place would work. Obviously, we made adjustments and changes to make this sustainable for me to be able to do, but I'm also one guy and I make mistakes, and anybody who looks at any of my sims know that I make a lot of mistakes when it comes to small little roster details, and we could have even built a better team. There were players that we left out in order to build these rosters. So there are ways that we could improve this, but I would say that we came out with such a clear result that this method works better than the other two that I'd like to see if there was any other ones that might be competitive. And so I want to thank everybody for coming and watching our Moneyballs rebuild and seeing which method was the best. And thank you for enjoying and coming along and watching our videos and sticking around at the end. Please leave a link below, subscribe. I plan on giving you more content. It is now the new year. It's 2025. We're going to keep on chugging into the next season in MLB The Show 2025. I already blank on what year game it is. We're going to keep on chugging. And adios.
Go home, get drunk, go sleep, wake up.